Thanks for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital and products and manufacturing. The prevailing question when it comes to ERP and PLM is, which one do you implement first? While to some, the answer may be obvious, but depending on the type of business you're running, a different conclusion may surprise you. In this episode, we invited our Netherlands colleague, Pieter Nevelsteen, to join us for an enlightening discussion looking at the implementation implications when it comes to ERP and PLM. Peter, Jonathan, and Jen identify the interdependencies between the systems and how one influences the other. Let's tune in.
Welcome back, everyone, to Stay Sharp, the podcast about all things digital related to products and manufacturing. My name is Jen Ferello, and I'm here today with my co-host, Jonathan Scott.
Hi, everybody.
And today we're going to be discussing the very chicken and egg question about which business platform to implement first, ERP or PLM. Joining us today is another one of our colleagues, Pieter Nevelsteen. Peter comes to us from our office in the Netherlands and brings significant experience drawn from a long career in the PLM space. Peter, could you please take a moment to share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, your experience, and your work here at Razorleaf?
Okay, thanks for being here. So my name is, as you said, Jen. I'm Pieter Nevelsteen. I'm working from the Dutch office and from Razorleaf, but I have, let's say, more than 2 decades history in PLM, doing all sorts of stuff, starting, of course, for the technical side. But the last couple of years, I was much more a business consultant and a solution architect in implementing different PLM systems in different industries, typical industrial equipment, automotive, and the last couple of years more and more in shipbuilding industry. So quite a lot of experience implemented all types of PLM sites. And this topic is also one of an interesting topic I like to discuss.
Yeah, this is a fun one, Peter, and I'm glad we're connecting to talk about this. And I guess I want to sort of make sure everybody who's listening has a sense of what we're really talking about, because was we were preparing for this episode and talking, right? One of the things that I think you can get sideways on is PLM or ERP. Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Don't you have to do both? And yes, absolutely, right? So just to level set everyone for what we want to talk about today, it's about that conversation on maybe priority or the driver or how you should go about putting these systems in place. Not necessarily that, well, you need one and not the other. So right. I think we are talking about, order and which one is the driver of what you're trying to do. And as another tricky thing that we can get sideways on in a topic like this, and I guess we have to be careful of, and yes, Jen, I'm speaking to myself because I get off topic, is
on occasion
is the line between the two, right? ERP and PLM, that line is not a clear, bright line. There are some things that PLM can do that ERP can also do, vice versa. So yeah, let's not spend too much time about that.
It's a thick, fuzzy gray, shades of gray sort of line.
Yeah.
It is. And that's not even to mention bringing in, MES or other topics into it. So again, we'll try and keep this simple, right? And talk about it from the context of, okay, PLM or ERP, which needs to really be the driver and lead and that kind of thing. Hopefully that's fair and we're all on board there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think where a good place to start is, what are some of the considerations when you're looking at your business as far as what are some of the drivers one way or another? What are things that you're considering when you're trying to decide, okay, we're assuming, and we talked about this before, we're assuming you're running your business on something, possibly Excel, maybe Smartsheet, maybe, whatever.
Right. QuickBooks, whatever it might be, yeah.
But when you're looking at, okay, we absolutely need both of these, what are some of the driving factors that help you decide which one takes priority?
Okay, let's try to answer a little bit what my view on this is. I think what I see in a lot of companies, I think they are driven financially. I mean, that's what the CEOs and the C-level are typically interested in, because that's a short, easy to measure thing. It's the money. But at the end, how the money comes is product definition. So my view is, if you start with the correct process, how your product definition, product configuration, product portfolio definition is well structured, the rest of the process is much easier to adapt and the flows are much easier to connect. Of course, I'm talking about the real product definition, engineering-centric companies much more, like the concrete manufacturing companies. But that is, for me, pretty clear or more obvious that the process definition is done in PLM first, so that you really first are focusing how the product definition is working, because that can be very complex already, and then they automatically will be driven in a more smooth ERP implementation, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point, Peter. And it reminds me of an episode we had a while back related to the business systems that every company needs to run, right? And to your point, you can't ignore the financials. Every company has to have finance in order to stay in business and that sort of thing. Although we do at times talk about organizations that are not businesses, right? So there are governmental organizations, research organizations that still need these kinds of tools where finance isn't the issue. But nonetheless, your point's well made. I think you can't ignore finance, but your point of, but if you think about processes, it might drive you in the direction of not saying, well, you have to start with finance, right? That's your point, is that process can drive you in a direction of thinking about the product development process first.
Yes, so you should not only product development process, but also the types of products. You have to define the product portfolio. Even if you engineer the order, configure the order, you have to define your product configuration completely, your product portfolio management completely set up, which drives different processes in ERP. If you don't know which type of products or type of groups of products you're defining beforehand, it's very difficult to pick and choose the correct process in your ERP system. So that you need a very clear and mature process in your product portfolio, configuration management processes, before you're able to define your ERP processes. So also pick the correct ERP solution.
I love this one, right? I love this particular topic. So your point, I'm going to rephrase it the way I understand it, is you can't really think about picking the right ERP product or even the right modules or processes to deploy an ERP if you don't understand something about your product portfolio. And for instance, if your product is a make-to-stock product, where you just make it and then people buy it from your inventory, that would call for one kind of process and one kind of ERP system. But if your product is a configure-to-order product where you don't really make any of them until someone orders it, and they order the one that's blue and made for this area of the globe, and it has this power rating, and until they've picked all the options and features they want, you can't make it. Well, that calls for a completely different set of processes and maybe a different ERP tool set entirely. Yeah,
completely agree. That's exactly what I meant. I have practical examples that I had the chance to be with a customer which had nothing, had no ERP, no PLM system. They decided to start first with ERP. After 2 years of struggle, they were struggling. At the end, they started, okay, let's continue with PLM. And during that phase, they decided, we did a completely wrong choice of ERP, because they start realizing about much more how your product configuration, how their product is structured, what's their product architecture. They were not realizing that, so they first were thinking that it was a gift for them that the ERP project failed at the end. They were happy with it. It's really a practical scenario I met some years ago. So that confirms my thoughts here. Actually, you need to understand your product architecture first, be able to pick the right choice. And it's less relevant in PLM, I believe, because PLM starts with an engineering project anyway. Yeah, even if it's an ETO, CTO project, or what, the first product you develop, it's a traditional innovative market process. It's a traditional product design, so that most of the PLM project can support that process. Okay, you have fine tunings, things like that, and every choice at a certain level. But the start is always the same. Definitely, if you're a starting up company.
So let me ask a question, and I'm wondering if if our view is a little bit biased by the fact that we work primarily with engineering companies, right? We work primarily in the heavily engineered manufacturing industries, whether it's aerospace, automotive, medical device, heavy industrial machinery, et cetera. The ones where product definition really plays a significant role versus areas like, distribution, retail, lighter manufacturing. So is our view just a little bit biased? I mean, do we divide it into like, okay, these kind of companies, maybe ERP is a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more important versus...
Of course. I completely agree, Jen. I mean, we are the view where PLM is more important. It's more about the engineering type of companies, and really the product definition company. But still, then, if you look in apparel industry, even there, the product definition and the variation or the changes of your product still is really impacting the process in ERP. Of course, if you don't have really a product to sell, if you have more services or things like that, you don't have a PLM need. That's completely out of scope topic for me, I think. But if you have a product definition, you first have to know which type of product you are delivering. If it's a simple product, okay, you might need a very simple PLM. But still, then you have to know it. And your PLM can be much more adapted to your rapid changes or rapid need to deliver in the services.
I agree. And I also think that the industry as a whole is moving towards, with the topic of mass customization. What used to be a simple product, now by the fact that you can customize it and configure it for your own personal preferences, customers can, then even those simple products are moving more towards an increased need for PLM versus...
Well, I'm gonna take us on a side road there for a minute, and I know everyone's shocked by that. But you bring up a great point, Jen, which is the mass customization ability. That's not a word, but
you just made
simple,
it one.
I did. But of simple products, right? Products that 30 years ago you would have said, well, we make one for this location, make one for that location, and that's it, right? It's not really mass customized, but we do deliver it to different markets differently. Well, today, and I won't pretend that I understand all the market forces that have driven this, but certainly electronics and software and all those kinds of global factors have made this the case. Even simple products today will have lots of variants. And even if they're not mass customized by end users, companies are just delivering more and more variants of their products. And one of the things that we see in the PLM space, right, and Peter, you can confirm this or tell me you see something different, but is product line engineering. People saying, people in the management level of companies saying, wait a minute, we're making 12 of these for the different markets we work in. They're so common to each other. We need to plan them as one product with variations, right? Now, whatever form that takes, right, in their business, they're doing that. And when they do that, it changes the nature of their product, right?
But also the rapid changes, or the products get obsolete. Parts get obsolete. The more electronics are used, the more we see the problem in PLM coming in. So it's so rapidly changing, and ERP cannot manage that anymore. The suppliers, they cannot promise that they can deliver it tomorrow anymore, a similar product. So the changes go so fast today that you really need the product definition is key if it should be your completely intellectual product. Intellectual product. That's not the correct word. Intellectual properties. Okay.
But you bring up a great point there, Peter, that I hadn't considered before about how the interplay might be between PLM and ERP, right? So in that traditional world we were talking about 30 years ago or however long ago, you could count on the whatever tools you had in ERP that could keep straight the configuration of your product because you were making it for 1 year or you were making it for 6 months and you made it the same way. And then, okay, maybe at the model year change, you had a changeover and you used a different component or something. But it was at a pace of change that you could manage, you could handle, you could work on inventory depletion, those sorts of things. But today, with the dynamic supply chains and components and obsolescence and all those things, you can't. And ERP systems were not always meant to handle that. Now, some do, right? Some, okay, they can handle it. And that probably gets to that blurry line between PLM and ERP.
Yeah, but then you get PLM functionality in ERP.
Right, exactly.
in my view.
No, I think that's exactly it, right? I mean, it's pointing out that how ERP is having to evolve to include some PLM functionality for that. But your point is well made. The operations side is not necessarily meant to keep up with the rate of change on the product development side. And you do get into areas that I think really are getting into PLM, like definition of the product. And I guess the example that came to my mind, and tell me if this matches from your view too, on the ERP side, maybe you can swap out the components in the bill of material. You can make a configuration change. On the PLM side, one of the ways we can deal with the rapid change is to say there are equivalents. right? That's typically been a PLM engineering product definition. Oh, here's my bill of material, but if you run out of this part, you could swap it for this part. If you run out of this part, you could swap it for that part. If all of that's defined up front, then the job on the operations side is much easier because they have alternatives they can move to quickly, that sort of thing. But again, it points to that if you don't think about that early, then you won't operate that way.
No, I agree. So definitely equivalence is one of the potential solutions for it, but it's getting at a certain point very complex because you don't know what happens tomorrow in this component. You don't know what will be obsolete tomorrow. So it's a very difficult and tricky topic in this discussion. Okay, but that's another episode, I think, to discuss this area. Otherwise, we drove to the topic. I drive away from the topic. So,
but I think it is just another piece of evidence, like you said, of how you have to pay attention to what the nuance is, what the detail is on the product development side, or you may miss something in your capabilities on the operation side, right?
And coming back to what you mentioned about all the variation and creating all these modular or variable products, I mean, if you don't control that product definition very well in your product definition application, which is typically PLM, how can you manage that in ERP? Never. Then you have to manage a PLM or an Excel sheet. But then the Excel is your PLM, which still you need to do. So you still need to do that first. Whatever you do it, if you do it in a PLM or an Excel, which is still often used to that. So
we covered that
still
in one of our episodes.
If you don't do
well.
that, you're lost. You're completely lost, and you have nothing in your ERP system which to manage. And you don't know what you're managing in your ERP system, to my view.
Yeah. I agreed. And this reminds me of an episode. I think, Jen, you were just referencing this. We had a conversation recently about configuration lifecycle management, right? And there are vendors that specialize in that. We talked to some folks about it. But that point of if you're not thinking about your product architecture and those families of products and how they behave and their rules, you have to do that up front. You have to do that early. And many times you have to do it across disciplines. But to your point, Peter, if you only think about it at the end when you're implementing ERP, that's too late. That's not the right time to have thought about that.
Yeah, absolutely too late. And then you take wrong choices in implementing ERP, and then you have to all make crazy integrations between PLM at the end because you need an integration at the end. But that then gets very, not saying impossible technically, because technically everything is possible, but you get a mess.
A lot more painful.
Building from one to the other. If that's not organized or well structured or thought beforehand, you get very chaotic integrations.
Well, and to our point,
and
to our point about drivers, right? What should drive what? I think every business leader would agree that what you don't want is something at the tail end of your process about like what can we make, driving the decision of what do we offer to the market, right? I don't think there's a sales or a business person out there who would say, yeah, we should decide what we're going to offer to the market based on what we can do. No, it's the other way around. Right. What does the market need? And then we'll figure out how to do it.
Right.
And to
what
your
will somebody
point,
buy?
Exactly, right? So you don't want to have your ERP system and what you chose about how to implement, how it's going to behave, those sorts of things, driving what your capabilities are in the market. Oh, well, we can't do it. Our ERP, we don't know how to handle variations in our product lines or whatever it is. Or we can't offer that kind of variation, even though maybe upstream sales systems or PLM systems could, but the integration's too hard.
Correct. So then you get limitation. You get the dominator of both applications, which is very small. And you only can deliver that to the market, so you limited your flexibility. And that's painful. At the end, it will be very painful. So limited you spend a lot of money implementing the system, but you can only use 10%, 20% of the functionality, the process you'd like to implement. So, which is it's a very, yeah.
And it goes back to something that the two of you were hitting on a moment ago about product complexity and maybe our bias, right? That from our perspective, yeah, PLM should be first, of course, right? It should be the driver. But that product complexity topic is a sneaky one, I think, right? Because I agree. I think there are still some industries where you are building make to stock. The design of what you have is fairly simple and straightforward, and maybe it's a manufacturing heavy business. manufacturing process is really the focus, and it's your secret sauce as a company. And perhaps in those cases, it's more about how do you execute, how do you operate, and an ERP could lead and be the driver in those situations, just like in non-manufacturing industries, right? PLM may not have a role at all if we're not talking about manufacturing. But in the case where the product has some complexity, that's really what we're pointing out, I think, right? Is the driver needs to be the fact that the product complexity creates things that we need to pay attention to when we're putting our business processes in place, and we shouldn't leave them till last.
Yeah, but I completely agree. The more complex your product definition is, or your complete structure is, the more it's obvious that PLM is more important or becomes more important.
Well, I want to throw
I think that to me it's more obvious.
I want to throw in one other factor. Aside from complexity is regulatory and compliance. So even if you're making a simple product, but it's going on an airplane, or medical device or something like that, like the traceability throughout the life cycle of the product to failure and basically and repair and everything, like PLM controls that much more so than ERP. So you have to have that level of traceability.
Well, that's interesting. I guess I would argue the other side of that too, Jen, that it's both. I mean, certainly you have to have in a regulated environment where the product itself is regulated. I think you're going to have a lot of that happen in PLM, and you need to, but you're also going to have a lot of it happen downstream in operations, whether it's quality and tracing the parts and certification of the material and all those things. I think it's both, but to your point, and maybe to the point Peter was making earlier, it flows downstream, right? So you wouldn't want to say, oh, I've got great traceability of my parts in ERP, but I really don't know how I got to the design in PLM, right? That would be bad. But I feel like it's balanced in those regulated industries. But I don't know. I mean, counter me. Tell me what I'm missing.
On the regulation, I'm not sure. I think you also can do it not without PLM as such, but at the end, that depends also again about the complexity what you deliver. If you deliver one simple product, you still can maintain it your regulatory compliancy inside your ERP system. Still complexity and making sure you follow all the regulations. It's still combined, I think. Because if you have a simple product, it's simpler to follow a regulation because it's a simple thing and not a simple process, but at least the documentation around it is connected to one simple product. You still maintain, and that's doable even to maintain if you don't have a PLM system.
I guess I was talking about more a situation where, like I said, it could be a simple product, but it's going on an airplane. And as part of that, you have to be able to, like, if that part fails, you have to be able to trace it all the way back through manufacturing and design and testing and design, et cetera, so that it's to see if it was ever out of compliance, if there was ever corrections done, et cetera. So that's...
Okay, Jen, you were referring to complexity is not only the product definition complexity, but the complete how to design complexity from begin to end. If that's completely complex and to be able to trace, then you definitely also need to completely, maybe even system engineering, complete traceability line. And of course, you need some systems to manage this process if you need the traceability on that level, for sure. And it's also with not only in the aerospace industry, but also in the food industry. That's even worse, I think. You have to track crazy things of things what you have to track the oil well while my part is produced. You need to be able to track and things like that. Definitely need some traceability system, which ERP is not designed for. It's PLM is.
Yeah, and in that respect, I completely agree with the point. Right, you can't do this without PLM in terms of any kind of compliance, because it's not just compliance of the physical product, it's compliance of how you got to that design in the first place.
So kind of trying to pull us back then, it's, acknowledging our slight bias. Where are we with this? Like, help us talk to our listeners as far as, like, if you're at that point, you're trying to evaluate, okay, which system do I need first? Which do I need? I need them both. Which system do I need first? Is it one or the other, or is it hand in hand?
Peter brought something up earlier that I'll ask you to comment on again, Peter. And it was about maybe not thinking necessarily about the system exactly, but the processes, right? That it's really about making sure that the processes that you're interested in, you're thinking about them maybe in the right order, so you don't get things backwards. You don't, do things before you've thought about what had to happen ahead of that. I mean, is that some of what it is, Peter?
Well, also think you. If you're in theory, if you're capable of doing parallel everything at one time, and you implement everything, every application at one time, that's the ideal world. But if that's feasible, probably not. Most of the companies cannot do that because then they have no business anymore because they are doing nothing else than implementing systems. But I agree, Jonathan. If you have some sort of enterprise architecture view, that you have really a process, high-level process view, you define the complete process, what you really want to achieve from start, from your requirements definition to your product definition and to manufacturing to service and the complete product lifecycle definition, including finance and service afterwards. If you define that on a high-level diagram, the enterprise architecture, then you might be able, then it doesn't matter too much what you choose. Because if you know what you want, and you make sure that all the integration layers are well defined ahead of your selection processes, this might solve this chicken and egg problem.
It's an interesting point because that approach in and of itself has its own challenges. But I agree, Peter. I mean, I think that's the best answer that at least I've seen with companies is if you have a plan or an architecture overall for the business early on, then you can put things in place in whatever order makes sense because you know how it all should all fit together. The challenge I see is, okay, how did you develop that architecture and what did you have in mind? Because most companies want to get the efficiency of using an off-the-shelf software for some of these components. And their thinking isn't wrong. Their thinking is, well, someone's already done that work. They've already designed it. I don't have to develop software myself internally for my business. I'll use this off-the-shelf piece and that off-the-shelf piece and that off-the-shelf piece. I'll put them all together in my architecture. But the problem is, if you defined your architecture for your business without considering what those pieces of software are, then when those pieces of software fit into your architecture, they may not be a perfect fit. So you have to adjust your architecture. So then you get into the problem again. But I think you're right. I mean, I think if you can plan it all, then you can do the order you want. It's just you have to have this give and take.
Yeah, it's purely theory. Yeah, theory. I know, Jonathan, but at least you should start with some sort of high-level overview architecture, and start with the piece that's might be PLM, might be ERP. But also see the problem if you start with that, then the next 5 years you will focus on that one, and your architecture is changing, your vision is changing, your product is changing, the world is changing, so the architect changes as well. So you're again back in the problem.
Right.
So it's at a faster and faster pace, as we acknowledged earlier.
So because everybody has some sort of ID in his head, at least in his head, the architecture, because they know I need the PLM, I need the ERP, they know it. But do they know it really and what they want? Probably not. And it's changing. So you start with something and then even your vision is changing. Because that's what my example I used before. They thought they did a complete RFP with an ERP, they did an ERP selection, they select that one. But while we implemented PLM, they said, oh, we missed this. Oh, this is not working ERP. Oh, you're a better ID. So they come a lot of other ID because the product definition was not known in that organization. So they missed part of it.
But I think you're bringing up a great point about enterprise architecture too, Peter, which is it can be developed, it could be used. People could think that that's the right plan. But if that's not communicated effectively to all the stakeholders and the people who are going to go off and do an ERP project or go off and do a PLM project, if it's not clear amongst everyone in the enterprise, then it has limited value, right? Like you just said, if you didn't think about product architecture when you did your enterprise architecture, you probably missed something, right? So if you don't evolve it, if you don't get everyone involved in it, it will have limited value.
So we're back to the people side of things.
Yeah, correct. And that's exactly what happens in a lot of organizations. PLM traditionally, which I'm not agreeing with, traditionally come from the engineering world, which don't talk with enterprise architects. Oh, we need a PLM. That's how it happens often.
Right.
And then they don't agree because, I have a different view. Enterprise architecture doesn't support my engineering vision. I'm not saying that PLM is engineering. Don't understand me wrong here. Completely not saying that.
You know what? We had a whole podcast on that too.
I didn't say that, but it typically comes from the engineering. It's driven from engineering very often.
That was the conclusion we came to in that podcast as well. Driven from engineering, but expands well beyond it.
But your point is well made, Peter, which is not everybody in an organization is connected to the enterprise architecture. And now I'll even say, let's go further than that. Not every organization knows what enterprise architecture is, right? Understands that as a term, as a concept, that kind of thing.
And even the enterprise architecture do not understand all the business processes very well.
Right.
That's the other way around as well. I don't think, because I saw enterprise architecture living in some sort of a tower, building an architecture. Don't talk with the business. That's also not good. So it's not so simple to develop these things either.
All right, Jen. Are we still on track, or have we found a totally different topic now?
Correct.
No, well, we always discover new topics in these kind of discussions. But so let me kind of try to summarize where we are on the whole question of which comes first or which should come first in your organization. We've acknowledged the fact that, ideally, you do them in conjunction, right? But it sounded like from what you guys were discussing primarily that any sort of decision is based on a careful assessment of companies' immediate needs, but also long-term goals, industry-specific requirements. So heavily engineered products, obviously, much more so than like we were talking about, like either distribution or services. In an organization that's focused and committed to improving the business, really a hybrid approach, involving parallel implementations and iterative processes of doing that. Like, okay, reevaluating whether it's the software, the architecture, how things have changed, et cetera. A parallel process of implementations, probably the best of both worlds. That'd be
and have some enterprise architecture, at least guidelines to the enterprise architecture. Maybe not the enterprise architecture as a whole, but at least the guidelines should be there.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's the company's needs, their long-term goals, their what they're trying to accomplish as guidelines. And then I think we kind of wrapped it up in the end saying that aside from all of the software and the engineering side of and the process side of things, don't forget to include the people, because it's, we've acknowledged in a variety of podcasts on almost every topic, it comes back to people are the hardest part of people, process, and technology. And so, considering them and doing some level of organizational change management, or in the case of this, actually, if we're going from Excel to PLM and ERP, there's some organizational changes that are going to have to be made there.
Yeah, I agree. But on the other hand, on the topic, first PLM or ERP, I don't see there is a big difference in people. If you do first ERP or first PLM, I don't see a big difference in the people changes. Okay, I agree. People are the hardest thing to change. But I don't see the complexity difference in first ERP or first PLM.
No, I agree with that. It's the fact that you're implementing new systems. So it's more the jump from what you've existing to either PLM or ERP.
Right.
Of course.
It's that
whichever
jump.
You do first.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. If you're implementing new systems, you're changing processes and that requires...
And then people are the difficult part.
People are the difficult part. That's for sure.
Okay, I had one more thought, Jen. You're gonna, you tried to wrap us up, but
no, that's okay. We can go to a part 2. So you come along with your new topic, and let's see.
So I'm gonna put this, and I'm gonna leave it here for people to think about. But was you were describing, the enterprise architecture and how that can help sort some of this out, this choice between which one is first, and if you have a plan for everything, then maybe it's less critical if you really have an enterprise architecture. What is that? Why is that? Well, I'm going to take an engineering perspective on it and say, that's because enterprise architecture, and there may be lots of folks who don't know what we're talking about when we say this. Those words sound like they mean something, but I'll give you my description. It is engineering the system of your business. So yeah, that's the thing I'm just going to leave here for a minute and say we shouldn't get into the topic, but it's systems engineering, right? But of a business. It's looking at a business and saying, how does it operate? Who does it serve? All those things. And then now, what are the inner workings of that system of systems that make it do what it does? That's what enterprise architecture is. So it's taking a very engineering approach to how people run their businesses.
But I agree. And to comment a little bit on that, and you should be able to replace system with another system. I mean, you should, another system is then a tool, a PLM one, with another PLM, very easily. If you control every interfaces between all these different actors or systems, you should be able to replace everything with everything.
Truly systems engineering, right?
Yeah.
Truly systems engineering.
Absolutely. So.
All right. I'm going to cut the two of you off because clearly we're going an hour if we get started on a new topic here. But I do agree, Jonathan, that would be a great topic. I love applying the engineering problem-solving method, if you will, to different scenarios and engineering a system architect for your or systems architecture for your business is definitely an interesting topic. So let's pencil that in for another topic at somewhere down the road. I do want to thank Pieter for joining us today.
My pleasure. It was nice to talk to you.
Yes, very nice to talk to you as well. And to our listeners, if you have any questions or if you'd like to share your opinions or experiences, either with implementing one or both systems, how did you do it? Or if you have a suggested topic for us, please. This is supposed to be a conversation. Be part of it. Please reach out to us through social media channels or our website. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, stay sharp.
Thank you for being here and for listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you have any questions about your PLM implementation, we'd love to have that conversation. Just leave us a comment on our post or send us an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. We appreciate all the feedback we get from our listeners, so don't be shy. And make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform or on our YouTube channel. Until next time, stay sharp.